Yes, good.
recording 哈 ，OK。那你讲的时候就把这个口罩戴上，然后就说那个麦克脸在这里。
Coming back to family these days? I've lost touch with how old your kids are. I know you told me my daughter's not. She's 12. Yes. Yeah. So is your 12-year-old in year 9? Oh, year 6. Okay. Yeah. So losing track. Yeah. Completely. Yes. So you still have a couple of years of peace and quiet. Yeah. Oh, okay. You're Helen? I'm a program salesman. Thank you. I so long since I bought 3 goes together. That's my normal time. This is new. I'm very cultural. really? Oh, really? Oh, really? When you can't see a beautiful boutique, if you're not, we can get you like that. All right, just sort of bunching up a little bit. Bunch up. They see you. Oh, should I cross the line? It's nice. Just a little bit. I'm going to shoot it later. Thank you. Noise maker. You probably need to stand in front of every speaker needs to stand. Please come in, please take a seat. Please come in, please take a seat. I'm sorry to cut off our beautiful Xueqin so unceremoniously. Please come in. Please come and sit up the front.请坐，请坐。I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners, the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on, the Ngunnawal people, and I wish to acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contribution they make to our city and to this region. The Dream of the Red Chamber, or Story of the Stone, is a book that changes people. For those of you who don't know me, my name's McComas. For those of you who do know me, you probably know me as a Sanskritist. Those of you who have known me for a very long time might remember that my first love was Chinese literature.
And anyone who loves Chinese literature loves Hong Lou Meng. And anyone who loves Hong Lou Meng must love also Story of the Stone. And Story of the Stone changed my life. I am one of the millions of people whose life it changed. And as a very young student, nearly 50 years ago, I was totally engrossed by Story of the Stone, and then went on to read pieces, extracts of Hong Lou Meng. But it really set me on the path of a lifelong love of Asian literature. I'm delighted to welcome you all to the launch of Dr. Fan Shengyu's wonderful new book, The Translator's Mirror for the Romantic, Xueqin's Dream and David Hawke's Stone. I'm delighted that there is a new generation of scholars at the ANU conducting serious philological language-based research into pre-modern literature. That is at the same time highly innovative and engaging. This is deep within the ANU's DNA, the importance and centrality of language to everything we do. And I do feel this has been allowed to slip. This is a message for the Dean. I do feel this has been allowed to slip in previous years, and it's so important to see these sorts of studies right at the center of our endeavor. It is and should be and must remain an important aspect of the ANU's DNA. I'm delighted to welcome distinguished guests, Professor Helen Sullivan, Dean of the College of Asia and the Pacific at the ANU. We have Guo Laoxu, a counselor from the Chinese Embassy with us, and Mr. Ke, and Qi also from the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office. So a warm welcome to all of you. I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker, Professor Helen Sullivan, who will officially launch Dr. Fan's wonderful new book. So please, Professor Sullivan.
Thank you so much, Nicomas. And one of the many wonderful things about being the Dean is that you are always reminded of what matters, and that will is a constant wherever I go in the college. And it is a huge responsibility to be Dean of this college, but an incredible privilege also. Distinguished guests, Dr. Fan, welcome to all of you, and to those who are viewing the book online. And I would like to pay a special welcome to Carol Hayes, who I just see up there on the screen. Carol, it is so lovely to see you. And amongst so many friends and colleagues, that's terrific that so many have come here to celebrate this great event. And what's the event? Well, we're here today to celebrate Dr. Fan's publication of his first English monograph on Red Chamber Dream and its brilliant English translation, The Story of the Stone by Routledge. Now, this, as you will all know, carries on a tradition set up by renowned sinologists, and Dr. Fan has moved one huge step forward to help readers and students better understand the cross-cultural classic, in which, in his own words, are the two sides of the translator's mirror for the romantic. ANU invests in excellence, and Dr. Fan's work clearly demonstrates global and regional impact. His book is based on the ageless Chinese classic literary work, and his achievement is to bring to our attention the rich cultural exchanges between the English and Chinese versions, exchanges that we need now more than ever. His reviewers have shown great insight in praising his book as insightful, groundbreaking, rich in scholarship and insight, and demonstrating deep thinking and knowledge. That's quite an array of plaudits. Literature is a crucial part of knowledge if we want to have a deeper understanding of the language and the culture that we want to study and engage with. And as our Vice Chancellor recently said here at the China in the World Center, China Studies is part of ANU's DNA. I'm glad to see that apart from running the very popular literature course at the School of Culture, History and Languages, and engaging with the local community in Canberra to demonstrate the charm of such a bilingual classic, Dr. Fan also contributed to to academia, the culmination of his many years of teaching and researching, offering a timely tool for both the experts and newcomers in the field. Dr. Fan has brought forward the concept of bilingual reading, which aims at carefully comparing both the original and the translation in order to shed new light on both sides of the translator's mirror for the Romantic. He was practicing the art of goldsmith, as Nietzsche described, and trying to pass it on to our younger generation. I am sure with his diligence, creativity, passion in both teaching and research, the translator's mirror for the Romantic will be well received by scholars and students well into the future. I understand that already 61 libraries have purchased this book, most of them in the US, according to the recent data that we have, and that is a fantastic testament to your scholarship and reputation. I know that you will agree with me when I say that Fan exemplifies all that is best in China studies at the ANU. His book demonstrates the love and scholarship and commitment that makes ANU such a wonderful repository of expertise on China and on Asia in general. In these very challenging geopolitical times, Dr. Fan's book, I'm sure, will open up dialogue between scholars and others in China, Australia, and around the world. It will help us to pause and think about why we need to spend time learning other languages and literatures, and will go a long, long way to cementing warm scholarly communication and understanding. I am delighted and indeed privileged to launch this wonderful scholarly work, to commend it to you and to ask you to join me in offering our warmest congratulations to Dr. Fan.
Beautifully spoken. Thank you very much for that, Professor Sullivan. I'm now delighted to introduce Professor Catherine Travis, Chair of Modern European Languages in the College of Arts and Social Sciences. Professor Travis is going to read a message from Professor Richard Rigby, one of our most outstanding sinologists, now Professor Emeritus in the ANU College of Asia and the Pacific. So please, Catherine.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to pass on to read this message from Professor Emeritus Richard Rigby, and pleased to celebrate this wonderful work coming out of ANU. In particular, because as not all of you may know, we at ANU consider ourselves the leading tertiary provider of languages in Australia. And this is both because of the breadth of language offerings that we have. We teach some 30 languages, almost twice as much as the university that teaches the next most many languages.
As we say in English.
As we say in English. But also because of the breadth and the quality of the research that we produce, and the kind of work that Dr. Fan has produced is obviously one that will help us retain that reputation nationally and internationally. So now I turn to Professor Rigby's words. First, let me apologise for not being able to be present to deliver this in person. That would have been a great pleasure and privilege, but although I cannot be physically present, I am so in spirit and am delighted to be able to present these remarks, albeit at second hand. I have known Dr. Fan over what are now quite a few years, and during this time, I have seen the continual development of his thinking about, first and foremost, the masterpiece by Xueqin, but also his deep and passionate engagement with another masterpiece, the Hawkes-Minford translation of this remarkable creation. It is this extraordinarily fruitful cross-cultural endeavour which is the subject of the book we celebrate today, a book which, in my view, takes us another step further in enabling us to elucidate the joys and mysteries, the riddles and surprises, and the dynamic and creative interplay of the 18th century Chinese and 20th century English imaginations of two masters, each classically trained in their respective traditions, encapsulated in these two wonderful works. This indeed is one of the main points of Dr. Fan's book, that the Hawkes-Minford, The Story of the Stone, one of the alternative titles of the Chinese original, otherwise known as The Dream of the Red Chamber, is itself a masterpiece of English literature, which can in a sense stand alone and be treated on its own merits, while never, of course, severing the myriad ties which unite the two, dream and stone. I strongly support this view, but would add that without the fine-grained, sensitive, deeply scholarly, but always approachable and lucid analysis provided by Dr. Fan, it would be difficult to appreciate just how fully this judgment is justified. Indeed, I would wish to add mirror to dream and stone as a third essential element to aid our full appreciation of both the Chinese original and what David Hawkes and John Minford did with it. I should at this juncture point out that while Minford translated the final 40 chapters and Dr. Fan concentrates on the larger Hawkes portion, Minford and his father-in-law were in constant contact throughout the process of translating the entire work. In this study of dream and stone, Mirror also offers the reader a series of profound meditations upon and explorations of the process of literary translation. And I should add to the undoubted delight of John Minford, as all who are familiar with his views will know, without at any point wandering into the mind-numbing swamp of translation theory. As far as that goes, there are really only two requirements. The first, as family enunciated by my revered brother-in-law, Pierre Rickmans, aka Simon Lays, that one must love the work one wishes to translate. And the second, that mastery of one's own language is even more important than that of the object of one's labours. And here, Dr. Fan quotes Gregory Rabassa, who, when asked whether his Spanish was good enough to translate Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude, replied that the real question was whether his English was good enough. There could, of course, be no question regarding the quality of Hawkes' English, nor of his Chinese. The same applies to Dr. Fan himself, as amply illustrated in Mirror. For without these cross-cultural, multilingual skills, it would have been quite impossible to write a work such as this. This is shown not only in his deep knowledge of the text, or rather texts, of the Chinese original, with all their complications and controversies, but also in his ability to tease out the internal jokes and games which Hawkes constantly played, as much as it would seem for his own enjoyment as for that of any potential reader. Equally is this seen in his study of Western literary allusions, of which Hawkes made much play, including the Greek and Latin elements with which any Englishman of Hawkes' age and education would have been thoroughly familiar, but which are alas increasingly recondite even to the university educated in the era in which we now live. There is so much more that I could say, but I should not try the patience of this assembly, nor the voice of the person who is so kindly reading it. In parting, let me simply offer my most sincere congratulations to Dr. Fan and encourage all of you to read his wonderful book. Then, having read it, read or reread both Dream and Stone in the light of what Mirror will teach you. If your native language is Chinese, your English will be immeasurably improved by reading Stone. If English, then the ability to read Dream in the original, aided by Fan and Hawkes, is the best possible reason for learning Chinese. Congratulations, Dr. Fan.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Catherine. You did a beautiful job with that. Almost 50 years ago, a couple of young knockabout lads went off to China together and had many, many good adventures. Now, one of those lads rather strayed from the true path and got involved with Tibetan studies and some weird language called Sanskrit. The other of those lads, who remains an object of this lad's enormous veneration, and I do have twinges of jealousy that you stayed the course. I'm talking about Professor Duncan Campbell, with whom I've enjoyed so many good adventures over the last half century. Professor Duncan Campbell is with the New Zealand Contemporary China Research Centre at Victoria University in Wellington in New Zealand. Are you there, Duncan?
Comus, I am.
We can just hear you. Can you speak up a little bit, Duncan?
I can try to shout, yes. I think it was 150 years ago that we went to China.
I was just being modest, Duncan. I didn't want to give our age away.
Congratulations, Xiao Fan, and thank you very much for inviting me to join this esteemed group full of old friends who I miss very much as I sit here in exile of some sort in Wellington. Xiao Fan, this is an amazing moment. The late George Steiner, in perhaps still, I think, the best book about translation, about the art of translation rather than the theory of translation, bemoaned the fact that there's a relative paucity of archive available to any of us who are interested in the study of the processes of translation. In the overwhelming majority of cases, he argued in After Babel, in the overwhelming majority of cases, the material for our study is only the finished product. We have in front of us an original text and one or more putative translations. Our analysis and judgment work from the outside. They come after the fact. We know next to nothing of the genetic processes which have gone into the translator's practice, of the prescriptive or purely empirical principles, devices, routines, which have controlled his or her choice of this equivalent rather than that, of one stylistic level in preference to another, of word X before word Y. The great mass of translation, he says, has left no records. And sadly, of course, we live in an age in which the development of the personal computer makes this even more so now, that our iterations of the translations that we happen to be working on disappear completely the minute that we edit our earlier versions. We have no, as students of translation, we have no way back machine that gives us this archive of translation. However, in the case of Chinese literature in English, we have this magnificent exception to that melancholic rule. And that is, of course, of David Hawkes's remarkable translation of the first 80 chapters of Xueqin's Meng, or in his telling, The Story of the Stone, that great 18th century masterpiece that is now available to so many 21st century readers. I find myself, McComas, teaching yet again. I mean, I think my students are a little bit puzzled when this old man shuffles up to the front of their class. And the one thing I say to them is, you really must go away and read this novel. Read it first in Hawke's Minford translation, and then turn to the Chinese original. The exception is, in this case, that Xiao Fan had available to him this remarkable archive of manuscript and typescript of Hawkes's translation, of Hawkes's notebooks, translators' notebooks that give us a day-to-day record of his labors over the text, of his own reflections in both writing and in interviews, and of course, and critically, I think, his letters between himself and Xiao Fan, but also perhaps most importantly, the letters between David Hawkes and John Minford as they set about this extraordinary task of translating. And Richard has filled in that background, and that the two of them carved up the novel. There was a division of labor, but they worked on the novel from the very beginning together. And who's better placed to tease out this alchemy of the encounter between a master novelist and a master translator than Xiao Fan, the man who, in editing the bilingual edition, of course, gave us Hawkes's invented original text. It's a remarkable story in itself. The base text that Hawkes made use of, which partakes of a whole range of different manuscripts. Just as I think the various manuscripts of Xueqin's work itself that have surfaced since the first imprint in 1791 allow us insights into his genius, Xiao Fan's sure-footed discussion of the treasure trove of this archive allows us, I think, a unique insight into the processes of translation in the hands of one of the 20th century's masters of the art of Chinese to English translation. We can watch, it provides us with this extraordinary vantage point where we can witness the veritable transmigration of souls, or transhen, as the Hong Lo Meng becomes the story of the stone. So thank you, Xiao Fan, for all your effort. But also I would like to add, thank you to your family, friends, and colleagues, all of whom I'm sure have allowed you to do this work, to sit and cogitate about these issues and produce this wonderful book for us all. Thank you very much, Xiao Fan.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Duncan. And one day, maybe you'll hear the cry of those migrating wild geese, and they'll draw you back to Australia from your exile in New Zealand. It's lovely to hear from you, and thank you very much for your contribution.
It's the Godwits.
It's Godwits. Okay, Godwits will do. Thank you. And now, I think in some ways this is the highlight where we have the opportunity to hear from the author himself. So I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Fan to the lectern.
I feel very touched and a bit nervous as well, to be honest. Thank you all for your kind words. Helen, McComas, Catherine, Richard, Duncan online. I am normally a low profile person, but I guess this is one of the highlight moments of my life. Today we are here to celebrate the publication of my first English book about the Chinese masterpiece Hong Lo Meng and its equally masterly translation to the story of the stone. This little book, red book here, is actually my PhD thesis published in 2004, 18 years ago. And this is the book that we are trying to celebrate today, The Translator's Mirror for the Romantic. I give both of them a nickname, quoting David Hawkes. This is my crimson joys, and this is my green delights. So my journey from crimson joys to green delights took me exactly 18 years. When I first came to ANU in 2009, I didn't really know that I would stay in Australia. I was a very young associate professor at Fujian Normal University, and my primary task of coming to ANU is to edit the bilingual edition of The Story of the Stone, which you can see over there, 5 big volumes, more than 3,000 pages. Professor John Minford and I worked closely together for 3 years to get it published. But I didn't know that we could have a book launch at that time. So there was no book launch for the bilingual edition. Technically, that was not my book anyway. When people talk about Chinese literature, the first book that will come to our mind would be definitely The Story of the Stone. When I started teaching Hong Lo Meng at ANU, there was not as many students as today who want to spend time reading both the original and the English translation, the brilliant English translation by David Hawkes and John Minford, of course. What I've been trying to do in my course is to try to teach my students, if I'm allowed to say so, the bilingual reading skills. By bilingual reading, I do not mean that you read the original and then the translation. It's not a 1 + 1 = 2 kind of thing. What I want them to do, and what I encourage them to do, is to go read both the original and the translation back and forth and try to think why and how did the translator achieve this in the process of successfully translating from one language into another. I know that Professor David Hawkes came to ANU many, many years ago, and he gave a series of lectures about his own translation. I'm sure some of the emeritus professors such as Richard and John and maybe McComas would still have the memory. According to what I heard from other colleagues such as Tana, Li Laoshi, David Hawkes was a very easygoing and approachable scholar. Unfortunately, I never had a chance to meet him in person. However, after reading his translation for more than 20 years, and after reading all the unpublished paper, which were very kindly granted access to me by Professor Zhong Mingfe, I kind of feel that I know him personally because I can see very, very clearly now what he was trying to do in his translation. So I totally agree with Richard when he said that the best way to learn Chinese is to read David Hock's translation. And if your native language is Chinese, reading David Hock's translation would definitely improve your English. I can't agree with him more than that. Hong actually is more than a book. It is the best representative of Chinese literature and also the epitome of our culture. I'm not sure about other people, but Hong indeed changed my life and changed my family's life as well, profoundly. But what is so special about David Hock's, and why did I need to spend so much time on reading his translation and the original? I've already spent the past 20 years on this topic, and I don't mind spending another 20 until I retire from ANU. What I'm trying to say is that I want to remind you that actually, as a kind of something hidden in plain sight, actually, The Story of the Stone is a brilliant novel written in English. And many people will forget that, they probably will think it's just a translation, but no, it is more than a translation. It is, this might sound a bit paradoxical, but The Story of the Stone serves as my tour guide when I try to explore and understand the Western literary world. So far, I have received unanimously positive feedback from the anonymous reviewers from the publisher, from colleagues in China and in Australia, and friends from United States, UK, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, etc. I started using my own book for my textbook for my course called Reading Chinese Literature, CHST 3212, starting from this year. What I want my students to do is to go and read both the original and the translation. And as I mentioned, I want them to think how can he achieve this and why? In what way can we learn from him? I want my students to keep this in mind, which is, actually reading both the original and the translation is a kind of game that you try to join. As Nietzsche said, it's a slow reading that you need to do it lento. It's not a quick way solution to anything. You have to spend time. You have to spend a lot of time sitting down, reading carefully, paragraph by paragraph, word by word, or even letter by letter. And I also want to quote David Hock's when he said, and I really agree with him as well, because he said, to be understood is better than to be praised. I guess that's what any author, any writer, any researcher, any teacher would like to achieve as well. I am particularly proud of the initiatives I introduced to share Hong with the wider ANU community and the Canberra community. Last year, together with my tutors and students in CHST 3212, Reading Chinese Literature, we successfully put together a classical Chinese concert. Jai is here today, Li Hong's there. And what I'm trying to do right now is to experiment with more possibilities with this classic. I'm trying to put together an EPUB and try to share it with a wider online community if possible in the future. I've been trying my best to make my students, both Chinese and Australian, to understand and appreciate the art of literature and the art of translation in this book, in this classic. I want to say that, David Hock's actually, he was not translating a novel only. He was kind of creating a channel through which Anglophone readers can explore various aspects of Chinese culture. And also at the same time, I want to say that, he is a very brilliant example of cross-cultural understanding in the most effective manner. And I wish I could do that. And I wish my students could do that as well. Finally, I would like to thank a lot of people, particularly John Minford, who's, I don't think he's online because like he's now staying in France in a very rural, remote area. So the internet probably is not good enough. And Mary as well, who have been helping me throughout the whole stage of from drafting, from revising, from rewriting, debating, everything. Like, you know, you spend so much time with me. And I also would like to thank my old supervisor, Carol, who's now online, Duncan as well, and my colleagues in the Chinese department, Susie, Gracia. I need to mention a lot of names, and I don't want to bore you with that. But honestly, no one can write a book alone. And I received a lot of help from, as Duncan said, from family, from friends, from colleagues, not only in China, in Australia, but also around the world as well. I think it's time for me to go out to help, you know, young scholars in our environment, you know, trying to help them to achieve whatever they have in their mind as well. Both School of Culture and History and CAP have been emphasizing the studying of, you know, Asian and Pacific languages, as well as conducting research and engaging with our own region. If my little book could in any way help people to better understand each other across languages and cultures, then I think, you know, my job will be the most satisfactory one. I'm glad to be part of ANU's tradition, and I'm happy to keep that tradition going on. That's what I want to say today. Thank you very much.
That really concludes today's book launch. I'd just like to finish by thanking Professor Sullivan for joining us. Thank you very much, Catherine, for relaying Richard's words. Special thanks to Duncan for joining us way across the world. But I'd really like to end on a bang with a very warm round of applause for Xueqin Fan for his wonderful work. Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much, and Ma Manzol.
We do have some drink and food.
The drink and food in next door. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. Drink and food in next door. Please join us. Oh, well, congratulations. That's really good.
为今天办的事情，然后我根本还不想到，现在说在你们现在都没忘了，完全忘了。对，全部忘记掉，你知道吗？因为你到那里就累，就那时候。对对对，还是你的礼物。